Welcome to this rapid revision session looking at the uprisings against Norman rule between 1068 and 1071. That's really in the early period. There's a few of these, and what's really important is knowing what happened and how William dealt with them, because none of them actually succeeded in overthrowing him. So let's take them one at a time. There were three main rebellions that we're going to have a look at. We're going to cover the three major rebellions that William faced early in his rule. The first is the revolt of Edwin and Morcar in 1068. The second is that supported by Edgar Aethling and the rebellions in the north in 1069. And the third is Hereward the Wake and the rebellion at Ely between 1070 and 1071. So let's get into the first one. The revolt of Edwin and Morcar, 1068. In 1068, Earls Edwin and Morcar, who had formerly been firm allies of Harold Godwinson, rose up against Norman rule. Remember, these are the two earls who led the charge at Gate Fulford in 1066, and even though they lost that, they survived, and they also supported Harold's crushing of the Viking invasion at Stamford Bridge. Edwin and Morcar gambled that William would not be able to control land stretching all the way from Normandy to Northumbria, but it didn't work out like that. And you know what? It's quite a reasonable assumption for them to make. After all, communication and travel at this time was very slow compared to today. So we're going to consider the causes and consequences of this rebellion. Firstly, we'll look at the causes. Edwin was angry as William had gone back on a promise that he could marry one of his daughters. This would have given Edwin more status as a member of the royal family and helped guarantee his place as being still a part of the senior nobility despite the conquest. Also, William did not trust Morcar to help defend the north against invasions from the Danes or the Scots, and was worried that he might be rebellious. These worries were, in fact, founded. Edwin and Morcar had been shown off like conquered prisoners when William returned to Normandy in triumph in 1067. This was hugely humiliating to a pair of proud warriors. Edwin and Morcar realised that they did not have the power that they had expected when they had been told that they were allowed to keep their earldoms. They weren't immediately disinherited from their earldoms, they were allowed to keep them, partly as a bit of a gamble by William to try and keep the Saxons on side in the north, but that wasn't going to last. So let's consider the consequences. William immediately hurried north and built castles in Warwick and Nottingham, which were Edwin's lands, and in York, which was Morcar's lands. This was a way of permanently showing that he was going to station troops there and that there was a Norman presence. William also allowed his men to destroy, or harry, wherever they came, destroying crops and housing as a warning not to rebel against his rule. Don't mistake this for the more widespread and destructive harrying of the north, though. That comes later. Morcar was replaced by Earl of Northumbria despite allowing him to keep his title. In a sense, he was still Earl of Northumbria, but had none of the ruling powers that he should have done. William had shown some leniency to Edwin and Morcar compared to how he behaved later on, but this rebellion likely affected his reactions in 1069 and 70 when the north again rebelled. You might want to pause this here and make some notes on it, as there's quite a lot to take in, but that's the gist of what happened with the revolt of Edwin and Morcar. Let's have a look at our next rebellion, Edgar Aethling and the rebellions in the north in 1069 going into 1070. This is really caused by four different things. Resentment over the Norman takeover, which means a bitterness when someone does something that you don't like. Edgar Aethling hoping to be the next king. Don't forget that after the death of Harold Godwinson, he had briefly been proclaimed king, though he never had a coronation. Also that Anglo-Saxon rebels thought the Danes and Scots would help them to rebel. And also a fear of losing land to the Normans, something that definitely happened, as was shown later by the Domesday Book. So let's have a look at the events of this rebellion. Early 1069. In January 1069, the Normans suffered their greatest shock since Hastings. A Norman army sent to take control of the north was attacked at Durham by local forces. Many Normans were slaughtered in the streets of the town. Their leader, Robert Cummin, was burned to death when he took shelter in the Bishop of Durham's house. The news of the attack gave new life to angry Northerners who resented the Norman takeover. Another English army gathered and advanced on York, laying siege to the new Norman castle that had been built in response to the 1068 rebellion. That's not all, though. At the same time, Edgar Aethling crossed the border from Scotland and came south to lead this rebellion. As before, William acted with great speed and savagery. He marched his army north, leaving a trail of destruction of homes, farmlands and animals behind him. His arrival broke the siege of the castle, and the rebels fled, Edgar heading back to Scotland. William then built a second castle in York and headed south to spend Easter at Winchester. He seemed to have dealt with the problem, but he had not. It's worth bearing in mind that this now meant that there were two Motte and Bailey castles in York, and their mounds still remain to this day. One is one side of the River Ouse and the other is the other side, so that if the rebels were able to take the bridge, well, there were Normans either side to deal with them. This takes us later into the summer and autumn of 1069, and the second rebellion that year. What actually happened then? Well, these are the threats that William faced. A large Danish invasion fleet was raiding the coast, led by the King of Denmark and his sons. Edgar Aethling, leading the English rebels in the north, had seized the control of York, remember. Simultaneous attacks on Normandy by local rivals in France, and rebellions in the southwest and on the Welsh border, including an unsuccessful invasion at Northam in Devon, which ended up being put down by some nobles loyal to William in that area. There was also an invasion by King Malcolm of Scotland, taking advantage of the chaos that was going on in the north. So these are all problems that William had to deal with, while still running his kingdom, which, remember, stretched between Normandy and also the north of England. So what did he do? Let's have a look at how William responded. William marched his army north and at a pace into York, catching the rebels off guard, arriving far sooner than they expected he would. The English fled, and the Danes, that they were counting on to support them, stayed on their ships rather than fight. After all, the Vikings had had their plunder, and they were satisfied to go home with what they had stolen. William celebrated Christmas Day, and remember that means the 3rd anniversary of his coronation, in York, wearing his crown, and with a big ceremony showing that he had the power, and he was unafraid. William ruthlessly destroyed the opposition, showing great leadership to his men and intimidating future would-be rebels. This culminated in the famous Harrying of the North, which I'll do a separate rapid revision video on later. So clearly, William had now put down the rebellions of Edwin and Morcar in 1068, and now had successfully responded to all the threats of 1069 too. Surely this shows that he was stronger than ever. But there was going to be one last rebellion against him by the Anglo-Saxons before he managed to really crush them. Our third and final rebellion is that of Hereward the Wake and the rebellion at Ely, 1070 to 1071. Here we can see some images which sum up the geography around Ely, known as the Island of Ely. It really comes from the Old English for the Island of the Eels, which relates to the main food and the main wildlife there. Today it is many miles inland in Cambridgeshire, but then it was a large island surrounded by water and marshland, so really difficult to attack. What's the relevance? Well, this island became a centre for a number of English rebels, but the man that emerged as their leader was Hereward, which means guardian of the army in Old English. But he could never win their support as King of England. Another thing to bear in mind with this is that this represents a guerrilla war, hit-and-run attacks by a smaller, less powerful army that still did damage to William's overwhelming forces. If you've been doing about the Vietnam War as part of your studies, you could almost compare it to that. It's almost like Hereward the Wake is leading the Viet Cong of the 1000s, and William the Conqueror, being much more powerful, is like the American army trying to subdue them in South Vietnam. Unlike the Vietnam War, though, it's William who eventually wins. Let's find out how. We're now going to have a look at the events of the rebellion. Afterwards, we'll highlight Hereward's actions in pink, and William's responses and how he eventually won in green. So what happened in order? The Danish, again, brought a fleet to England threatening an invasion. At the same time, an English thane called Hereward came back to East Anglia. Hereward found a group of Normans celebrating having killed members of Hereward's family. He killed them and then led an attack on Peterborough Abbey and with his Danish allies stole the abbey's treasure of gold, silver and jewelled ornaments. Hereward took these items back to Ely, his hideout effectively, where with his allies he held the island for over a year. William's men could not overcome the problem of the marshland and the water defences. Hereward was not going to be easy to defeat. The rebels attracted much more support, increasing their threat. Earl Morcar even joined the rebels, and it was easy for exiles to travel to Ely by sea. William needed to deal with the rebellion himself, and he swiftly acted to put it down. He sent messages to King Sweyn of Denmark offering him money to go home. This bribery worked, and the Danes sailed home with their riches. William surrounded the island and ordered his men to build a causeway onto the island. Meanwhile, a witch mounted a tower and screamed curses at the rebels to sap their will to fight. One of the things that is suggested that she did at the top of the tower was give evil incantations and then turn around and expose her bare bum to them. Must have been a bit of an insult. I doubt they found it as funny as I would. They responded, though, by burning down the tower, killing her. Bad luck witch. The Normans then used wood, stones and tree trunks to create a bridge, but when the knights attempted to cross it in their heavy armour, it collapsed and many of his knights drowned in the water. A second bridge was made using boats and wooden planks. This was successful and William defeated Hereward's forces. It's likely too that he had the support of some of the monks at Ely and was shown a bit of a secret entrance to the island. When he got there, he had people's hands and feet cut off, eyeballs pulled out, and had some imprisoned for life. Hereward, well, we're not sure what happened to him. He disappeared from history. Some suggested that he escaped and would then rise up again. Others suggest that he may have been killed. We'll probably never know. Alright, so let's have a look at Hereward's actions. Hereward came back to East Anglia. He killed the Normans that had killed his family and raided the abbey at Peterborough. And then he took those items back to Ely and his hideout. So what did William do in response? He acted himself to put down the rebellion rather than relying on someone else to do it. He bribed the King of Denmark to leave. This is where these rebellions can get quite confusing. After all, in the previous rebellion in the north, the Danes had also attempted to invade and then gone home once they'd had enough plunder. William also laid siege to the island and attempted to get them to surrender using threats from a witch. This is an early example of psychological warfare. However, Hereward acted by burning down the tower and killing the witch. The Normans used a series of bridges and causeways to try and invade the island. The first one failed, but then the second was more successful. Eventually, he brutally punished Hereward's rebels, and Hereward disappears from history. So that gives a summary of what happened in the rebellion of Hereward the Wake at Ely, what Hereward did, and how William responded, eventually winning. Some final points then. William faced three main rebellions early in his reign. The first in 1068 saw Morcar and Edwin rebel in the north. Quick action by William put the rebellion down. He was decisive but partly lenient on Edwin and Morcar, perhaps feeling more reprisals. In 1069, Edgar Aethling joined the destructive rebellions and simultaneous raids with the Danes. William responded more brutally this time. In 1071, Hereward the Wake rebelled from Ely, and after a hard fight, William won here too. By 1071, William had shown that despite rebellions, his power remained strong and secure. Also, his actions in putting them down and the ferocity with which he did so deterred other people from standing up against him. He would suffer other rebellions, particularly from some of his own earls in 1075, but this was the end of major Anglo-Saxon resistance to the Norman conquest. As I've mentioned before, there'll be a separate rapid revision video on the Harrying of the North, which I advise you to watch if you're not familiar with that. It's a key outcome of the 1069-1070 rebellion. But for now, that's the end of this rapid revision video. I hope it's been detailed enough for you. I've given about 5 minutes to each of our rebellions, and hopefully that'll be enough detail for you and you've understood it. I would recommend, though, that because this has been quite brief, you rewatch it and make some notes if it's unclear. There are quite a lot of similarities between these rebellions. But enough yakking from me for now. This is meant to be rapid revision, not a full lesson. So I'll say thanks very much for watching for now. If it's been useful, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and if there's anything else that you want me to do a rapid revision video on, please pop it down in the comments below and I'll see what I can do. That's all for now. Thanks and goodbye.